So we're in the apiary this morning. We've had a lot of rain, but we've just got some clear weather, which is really good. And we're starting to harvest a little bit of honey. There's not a whole lot around at the moment. And we have a special guest here today, Hilary Kearney, all the way from San Diego, who's going to show us a little bit about her book and also about how to spot queens. We might even get into some hives and she'll share some tips on queen spotting. If you haven't seen her book, it's pretty cool. I had it last night with my son Charlie, who's only 4.5 years old, and he got up to number 18, I think, spotting queens. I was actually really impressed. It was so much fun. It's like Where's Wally or Where's Waldo in the States, but better because it's about bees and it's full of amazing educational stuff as well. But yeah, I was really impressed that 4.5-year-old and myself could have so much fun. Sometimes he'd even spot it before me, as well as sitting here in the office with some of our most experienced beekeepers and having fun seeing who could spot the queen first. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's a very cool book to have on the shelf, and a lot of fun when people come around. And it kind of starts this conversation about bees, which having honey on the table, honeycomb does, but this takes it to another level with all of these amazing pictures in here of queen spotting, and also lots of tips on how to do it. But as well as that, it also hones your skills as a beekeeper. Hilary, why do you think that it's important to be able to spot queens?
Well, most of the time you don't really have to find the queen, but there are certain times, like if you need to requeen your hives, if you're worried your colony swarmed and you want to see if you still have a queen. If you're doing an observation hive or something, you want to make sure you either get the queen in your observation hive or you don't get her in there. And then I always say, just like for your own joy and pride that you can find the queen. It just always feels good when you can find the queen. And especially if you have like a friend over and you're showing them your bees for the first time, if you can point out the queen to them, people really love that. So I think it's just like kind of a necessary skill that if you're a beekeeper, you feel like you should be able to do it. And so many people just kind of give up on it and then kind of feel bad about it or feel like a little embarrassed. And so I just think practicing and getting people interested in honing those skills is something that could be really cool.
So Hilary also has Girl Next Door Honey and Beekeeping Like a Girl. So if you haven't tuned into what Hilary does, she's got a very good way of articulating things, and it's actually captivating with her writing and teachings of beekeeping. And she also teaches beekeeping in San Diego. So the honey's streaming out here, which is nice. We might get another frame going because we are a little bit low on honey. Even though there's not a lot around, I know there's honey coming with that rain that will set off the flowers. So pretty excited to get some more honey on the shelf in the office. And so I'm just going to turn this one as well. I'm just putting it in halfway and giving it a turn. Or maybe you want to do the next move here.
I just turn it?
Yep, just turn that. And then we should see honey coming out of this one in a second too. It'll be interesting to see the flavour difference. But meanwhile, how about we start to open up some hives, and perhaps you could teach people.
We can see if we can find a queen.
Yeah, we can see if we can find a queen. And also if you've got questions, especially about queen spotting or things in the hive to do with the queen, Hilary's a great person to ask. So put your comments in below and we'll get to answering them. Leah here will read out your questions and we'll answer them while we're streaming live. I'm just going to have a little taste.
Yeah, I was already wanting to do this too.
Oh, wow, that's the has got a bit of the paperbark in there. Yum.
Tastes a little buttery.
It's good. Okay. So, I've got a few hives here to pick from. Let's start with the one just down here. And we'll give them a little bit of smoke. Good idea. There we go. So we're just blowing a little bit of smoke in the front. It's a bit, probably you wouldn't normally open a hive right now. It's a cool morning, the bees aren't even flying yet, but we'd like to get in there and do a little queen spotting, so we'll see how it goes. Hopefully the bees aren't too upset about it.
I don't trust your bees, so I'm putting on my veil.
Yeah, this hive is not quite as friendly as that other hive we were pulling apart a couple of days ago, but I'm sure they will cooperate for this. So when you're new to beekeeping, always make sure you put on your protection. You do need a good bee suit, and wear your gloves if you're new. Thank you. Let's have you around more often. Any questions, put them in the comments below and we'll get to answering them. Meanwhile, let's open the hive and have a look. It's always good to leave them just a little while after you've smoked them, so hopefully they will be nice and calm by the time we open the lid. You can hear that sound, I'm not sure if you can. When you add the smoke, they raise in volume as they all buzz and respond to that, and then they calm down again. And it's then when you want to start opening the hive. May as well let you do the honours here.
See this one? She's saying, I'm not too happy. See how she's got her little bum in there? She put her stinger out too. So sometimes when you first open them, you can see them doing that. And then she calmed down a little bit. I like to, sometimes when I take the inner cover off, I'll leave it cracked with like my thumb in it for a second, just to wait a second, give them a little bit of a chance to go, okay, we're coming in. Because sometimes it's a little bit of a shock to just take the whole thing off. Doesn't matter with your bees are nice. But if your bees aren't as nice as this, that's one of my tactics.
So what she's doing now is just having a look on the inner cover to see if the queen is on there. You don't want to orphan her from the hive, so she was on there. You just want to be careful that she can crawl back into the hive. And if you're not sure, lean it up against the hive so that the queen could crawl back in if she needed to. Any questions, put them in the comments below. Otherwise, Hilary's going to give us a few tips now on queen spotting.
Well, one tip is that if you really want to find the queen, you're not supposed to use so much smoke. So we were a little light on the smoke, which is good. And if I were to guess where the queen was, if you look at the top here, you can see all the bees are clustered right here. So if I'm guessing where she is, it would probably be in the middle of this cluster. And so these frames, which there aren't any bees on top of, are probably not going to have the queen on them. They could, but they probably wouldn't. However, I'm going to take out this one first, just to make a little room so we can look for her. So I like to take out one that I think doesn't have the queen on it, so I don't have to worry about rolling her when I pull the frame up. This one's tight. Try to use your little J-hook trick.
Under here. This is how we do it.
Oh, you do it under there?
Here in Australia, it's got a really good lifting point.
Ah, okay. I have a very bad habit of just prying on the end and breaking frames. Oh, I see. Yeah, this works.
You use a different tool, right?
Yeah, I have a different kind of tool.
So she's coming up nice and slow, showing not to roll any bees. It's that first frame that's the tightest to lift.
And then per our assumption, this is all honey. And because this is all honey, we wouldn't expect to see the queen on there. I give it a look anyway, just in case she's being a weirdo and hanging out in the honey, but she's not on here.
notice we're double purposing the shelf brackets. Hilary asked if we had any frame holders, and I said sure, we'll just use these. So that's a handy thing you can do if you've got those shelf brackets already. Otherwise we've got them in the store.
So now that I got one frame out, I can move right along. And if I'm making a guess as to where the queen is, like I said, I think she's probably in the middle. So I'm actually going to just go straight to the middle here. Try pulling up a frame and see if we're right, if we guess right.
Eric's wondering if you were actually doing a brood inspection, would you shake the bees off the frames?
I wouldn't, no. If you're not able to look through the bees and see clearly, you can take like a little feather. That's what I like to recommend people do. Just take a feather and just kind of gently move them out of the way. If you were to shake them all, it's just kind of unnecessarily, I don't know, dramatic. So if you're having trouble seeing, just doing like a gentle moving them out of the way. Sometimes I actually blow on them just really gently, but that can also backfire on you. And so sometimes it upsets them, so you have to do it really carefully. I don't see the queen on here.
So what's quite interesting is I typically look for the movement of the queen because she has this kind of striding motion that's quite different to the rest of the bees. And but with your book, of course, there's no movement in it, so it's honing my skills to look for different things, which is good, I think, and will help my ability to spot queens quicker. And if you want to get Hilary's book, we'll put a link in the comments below so you can go right to Hilary's site and get it.
Another thing I do when I'm looking for the queen is as I'm pulling up this frame, I'm actually looking at the side of the other frame just quickly to see if I glimpse her on the next frame. So here's one where I don't think she would be on this. She could be once again, but this is mostly capped brood. So that's all capped brood right there. So once again, don't think she's going to be on this. So normally the queen's on a frame that has open cells for her to lay eggs in, since that's her job. She needs to have a place to work. And this one has open brood, and there are some open cells, so this could be one that she would be on, but I don't see her.
So it's interesting, there might be 20,000 bees in this hive, and you're looking for one, but it's surprising once you get your eye in how you can actually find the queen.
If you knew you had a failing or old queen, what's the best way to replace the queen or to requeen?
Is that question about like how do you actually kill her?
Well, what would you do?
Well, I would probably order a queen from a trusted breeder, so I could get some new genetics in there, since the ones that I had were kind of failing. Sometimes though, if I see that the bees are making their own new queen, if they're superseding on their own, sometimes I just let them do that, because bees generally tend to do better than humans in making choices for themselves. But you could also buy a queen. So this is all honey, that she's probably not going to be on here. And then essentially you would just go in like we're doing right now, and you would find the queen, and you actually do have to take her out of the hive in order to get your new queen accepted. So normally I just pinch her and put in the new queen, and I usually do that on the same trip because I don't want to have to make multiple trips. So now I'm starting to second guess myself. Maybe she was on the frame that I skipped over, and she wasn't actually in the middle of this little cluster.
So how much time would you leave between pinching the queen and putting in a new one?
I personally don't leave any time because I don't have my problem is that I have too many hives and not enough time. So I don't want to have to make multiple trips out to that hive in order to requeen. So I usually will pinch her and put in the new queen at the same time.
And how do you find your success rate doing that?
Pretty good. I think a lot of times when people don't have success requeening, it's because they're working with a breed of bees that's too different from the one that they have. So I always try to get a local queen, and I always try to match whatever genetics I have. So if I have Italian bees, I try to get a local Italian queen. If you're doing like Italian bees and you try to put a Russian queen in, they're less likely to accept her.
Interesting.
Whoa, look at that one bee. Look how bright her abdomen is. It's like bright orange. How weird is that? Well, this queen is just really tricking us here.
Hilary, Diane would like to know, how many flow hives do you have?
I have 4.
Okay, if you've got questions, keep putting them in the comments below. Also let us know any tips you've got on finding the queen and put them in the comments. And it's also interesting to know where in the world you are tuning in from, if you want to put those in the comments too.
These are all honey.
So sometimes it can be tricky to find the queen. Do you have any techniques to use when you need to find the queen and you really can't find her?
Yeah. One technique, we could actually try this if we wanted, is to do like a kind of bookend thing. So you would, we would need another box to do it actually, but you pair up 2 frames and then you leave a lot of spacing on either side. And the idea is that the queen wants to go to the middle so she can be warm and protected. So we kind of make these pairs like this right here, but we'd have to slide this over a little more. And then we need a little more room. We need another box to do it properly, but you kind of pull it away from the edge like this, and then you wait a few minutes. So if there is a queen in here, the idea is that she would go to the center, and then you can just quickly look, and you kind of open the pairs of frames like a book. You look in the middle. So here we have a pair. If she was on either of these frames, she would be in the middle. But in this case, we've also got it against the wall, so she could be against the wall. So I don't see her on this one. And I don't see her on that one either, but she could be against the wall. Why don't you take this one for a second? We'll double check ourselves if she was on the first honey frame somehow. Nope. It would be a really funny trick if you had me open a hive that didn't have a queen.
I promise I haven't done that to you.
Cedar Andrew would like to know, how come the hole in the top cover is covered?
We cover the hole in the top cover if we don't want them to get up in the roof and make honeycomb. Some people do like to let them do that, and other people don't. It just depends. It's nice for a little while to collect some honeycomb under the lid, but after a while it becomes this mess to clean up, and we like to block it. So what we've done with our latest flow hive 2 is to provide a plug to put in that hole in the inner cover.
So Laurie's asking, what if the queen flies away?
She wouldn't, usually. So the queen would really only do that if you were like being really invasive with how you were, like the only time I've had that happen is when I was like pulling a hive completely apart and using a lot of smoke. it would be really unusual if just doing what we're doing now, a queen flew away. Another thing is, you know, like if you really cannot find a queen, you can always just put them back together and come back another day and try again another day. Sometimes when you're just pushing it too long, the longer you have the hive open, the less likely it is that you're going to find the queen, because she kind of goes into hiding. So sometimes it's better just to give up and come back on another day.
Can you notice the tone of the hive just changing a little bit there?
Yeah, it's totally changing.
How about we just add a little more smoke again?
But I was kind of thinking it sounds almost like that kind of queenless sound that they make.
Gambian's interested that you're both beekeeping without gloves.
Yeah. If you have aggressive bees, then I'd be putting my gloves on, and if you're new to beekeeping, put your gloves on also until you get really comfortable and familiar. But there's all sorts of extremes. We had a beekeeper here the other day, and he was happy to pull the hive completely apart with no bee seed at all. But then that's his comfort level, and also his comfort level with stings as well, because he tried it on another hive and then got some stings. So it's up to you, but make sure you've read the safety information. There's links at the bottom of our pages about bee stings, and just take care of yourself and others around bees, especially as you get used to beekeeping.
Well, we do have eggs on this frame, so that tells us there is a queen. I just can't find her. You want to try to best me?
I'm hearing a toot.
Oh yeah, I heard that too. I think it's a worker one.
Worker toot.
Mm-hmm.
So queens can toot sometimes. But what's the queen tooting, Hilary? You know?
Why is she doing it?
Yeah.
I don't think we really understand why they do it. I mean, beekeepers will say it's because they're like establishing themselves, like a new queen does it, kind of like declaring that she's the new queen, or to call other rival queens to battle. I really don't think we have a great understanding of why they're actually doing that. You think she's on the wall? They're all, getting excited right here on this frame.
So we're looking around, we're looking for that shiny back plate that seems to be more present on queens, also the bigger legs and the longer abdomen. The wings usually come halfway down her body unless she's a small queen. Sometimes they can be quite small if they're not well formed or just really young and haven't.
Oh, there she is. She is on the wall. She looks little.
Okay, spot A.
She's, well, yeah, she's right on the wall right here. See her?
So the old hiding on the wall trick, eh?
Yeah, she's a wall walker. So sometimes if I'm requeening a hive and I really have to find the queen, I'll bring out another box and I'll start transferring each frame into my empty box. And if I really can't find her, I'll take all the frames out and I'll just look on the walls, because a lot of times they are tricky queens will hide on the walls and be kind of hiding in the corners or running around on the wall. But we picked up this frame because we saw a lot of activity there, right? We saw all the bees running over to that corner. We saw them doing that fanning behavior. And so that's kind of a sign that the queen would be in this area.
So that's a good tip. You're looking for the activity around the queen. if you can't find the queen, look for the activity. Any more questions, put them in the comments below and we'll keep answering them.
Joel's actually interested to know what means of starting a hive or establishing a hive is the best. Installing a nuke, capturing a swarm, or taking a split.
She's still there.
Yeah, she's still on the wall.
So the easiest way to start is to order a nucleus off a queen breeder. Would you agree?
Yes, but I think the best way to start is to catch a swarm because that's the most fun.
We've got lots of videos to show you how to install nukes and also how to catch swarms or take splits. Taking splits in springs can be a great thing to do because it can then limit your hive from swarming because they've got all of that space in the brood nest open with new frames, and it's generally the overcrowding and lack of space to lay eggs are the major triggers for swarming. So if you get it early enough, get a good split. That's one of my favourite ways.
The other really wonderful thing about starting with a swarm is that they are ready to go. You know, they're ready to start that new colony. So they build out new comb really quickly. And it's just so exciting to watch them just pull out these beautiful white pristine combs. Versus when you do a split or a starter colony from someone, they're going to be, you know, they're going to pull out new comb too, but sometimes you have to feed them to get them going. And usually with a swarm, you don't have to feed them because they've already got honey in their stomachs and they've been preparing for this journey to start a new colony. So I don't know if you can see, but right here, we've got a little brace comb, a little bridge comb between frames right here. See the crack? So this is kind of a fun way. A lot of people ask me if I'll remove this, and I don't, because I like to have it. It helps me figure out which order the frames should go back in. So it's like a little puzzle piece now, and I know that I've put the frame in exactly how it was.
Oh, great tip. Norma's asking, with the hive so full, are you concerned about swarming? And when do you do splits? She's in Northern California.
This hive is about right. It's got enough bees to patrol all the combs and look after the hive.
It's not super full.
What we're as it increases and the bees really start bulging out, we'll be putting the super on as the flowers start flowering here over the next few months. So it's you want it at least this full before you even put your super on top. Otherwise you'll be waiting a long time and giving the bees too much area to patrol and keep warm.
Sam has a little hint on finding the queen. Try not to look for her. Try looking for the bee that is not a worker. And it's just a slightly different way of thinking about it.
That's great.
It's all mental strength.
Jenny's asking, do you put the dead queen back in the bottom of the hive so the hive will accept the new queen?
Actually, what I normally do is I take the dead queen and I rub her body on the new queen cage. So I'll just take her and kind of rub her on top of the cage to get her scent on the new queen. And I think that helps make them react to the new queen's cage a little bit better. And then if I do that, I don't leave her body in the hive. I would take her body out. If I'm going to requeen where I kill the queen, wait 3 days or wait a week or however long, then I will, the bees are hearing me talking about killing the queen. They're not happy. Yeah, if I were to do it that way, a couple of days ahead of time or whatever, then I would put the body in so that they know what happened to their queen. And so it's this kind of logical, not logical, I don't know, I just kind of go with my gut. But if I am going to leave them without a queen for a little while, I like to put the body in so they kind of know what's happening.
And Chuck's asking, how many hives do you manage?
I have between 60 and 90 hives usually. And I'm managing my hives, and then I'm also managing other people's hives.
Full-time job.
Yes, it is a full-time job.
Sybil wants to keep bees. Her parents live on 7 acres in California, but they're afraid of bees. Any advice on how to educate them?
I think it really helps to watch documentaries with them. So if you can watch like a nature documentary, actually one of my favorite documentaries is this really old Nova special, and it's called Tales from the Hive. And if you go to the PBS Nova website, you can watch it for free, and it just tells you about like the incredible life of bees. And so I think if you can get them engaged with a documentary or a book or something like that, I found that people who are scared of bees tend to fall in love with them the more they learn about them.
Kyle's asking how many frames are in the brood box in the deep.
This one's 8, right?
So this one's an 8 frame, so it's a standard Langstroth size. There's basically 2 standard Langstroth sizes, and there's 8s and there's 10s in the brood box, and that matches up with 6 flow frames for the 8 or 7 for the 10. We had to do a bit of calculating work there in the early days to make sure we could get a good match for both sizes in the sizing of the flow frames.
Jesse's wondering, how cold is it here today?
So it's actually quite a pleasant day here. It's a day where you could be in a t-shirt, but a long sleeve shirt would probably be more preferable. It's normally you'd probably wait a little bit later in the day for it just to warm up a bit more to do your brood inspections, but this is the time of day each week that we like to get on camera and answer questions for anybody beginning in beekeeping or anybody experienced that wants to really ask questions about the flow frames or anything in beekeeping. So we're here to help, so tune in this time each week. And if you tune in partway through, we've got Hilary Kearney here today, who's all the way from San Diego, and it's an honour to have her here with her expertise, and she's been teaching us a bit about queen spotting, which is the title of her new book. We'll put a link in the comments below. It's a fantastic book for all ages. My 4.5-year-old really enjoyed spotting queens. There's also a wealth of information in there, and even it's a fun thing to do with seasoned beekeepers. You can race to find the queens. It orders from easy at one end of the book to quite challenging at the other, where the queen gets harder to find. And it's great for honing your skills on rainy days or sitting around the table and sharing the love of bees with friends. So just adding a little bit of smoke to the hive. And we've got these rainbow bee eaters zipping through. You heard that little call. They're a beautiful little bird that likes to eat bees, and they've actually never been at the office here before. But we've got this little flock moved in, and they just keep zipping through, and we've been watching them, and Hilary's got a really astute eye for what's going on in the world of the animals, and it's fascinating to watch her tune in and go, oh, the bird's actually pulling out the stinger of the bee. So the rainbow bee eater grabs the bee, and whacks it, removes the stinger before eating it. It's such a clever bird to be able to get that together. So putting back on the inner cover can be a bit tricky if you want to do it gently without squashing any bees. So what she's doing is she's sliding across and jiggling a little bit, trying to get all the bees out of the way so we don't squash any.
Hilary, this question's for you. Do you paint a spot on your queens?
No, not usually. I do a lot of swarm rescues and cutouts, so most of the queens I get, I don't know how old they are when I get them, and the only reason to put a dot on them would really just to be able to find them easier, and I like the challenge of finding them without the dot. And I actually think when you have the dot, it kind of makes you lazy. You stop looking for how the queen actually looks, and you kind of just become reliant on looking for that colored dot. And the bees, my bees at least, usually clean off the paint anyway, and they can clean it off really quickly. So I've just found that it seems a little bit useless in my case.
And Danny's asking, what did you mean by a queenless sound?
So when your colony is queenless, there's this really subtle sound. It's like this roar. But they can also make that roaring sound, you know, when you just have the hive open for too long. And it's so subtle. I'm not especially great at identifying it yet. I always try to listen for it and try to distinguish it from their other sounds, but there's this kind of roar they make when they're queenless sometimes. We can open another one?
Would you like to open another one?
Yeah, or if you want.
Okay. We've got a bit of honey here. I just couldn't help
wow,
but
that made a lot of progress.
take my veil off and have a little taste. Now, the difference is actually really striking between those two frames. It's one of the real joys I find of harvesting with the flow hive is the different flavours you get from each frame. This one's more of like a malty kind of a round flavour, and this one's sharp and floral and full of the taste of very scented flowers.
Mm. This one tastes like the one that I was trying before out of the jar.
I love these floral notes in this right-hand jar. That's just so. It just gives me that image of bees foraging on millions of flowers in a 5-mile radius and bringing all of that nectar back into your hive and doing their amazing work to turn it into honey.
Yeah, one thing I didn't think about until I did a flow harvest is that when you harvest with the flow hive, you're actually preserving a lot of those delicate flavors that can be lost when you expose the honey to too much air. And so, like, when I harvested with the flow hive, I felt like I was tasting like a lot more different delicate floral flavors that I normally don't get.
And we get that feedback all the time, which is it's just a beautiful thing. And to me, people sometimes ask what my favourite honey is, and my favourite thing is actually to have lots of different flavours of honey, because the joy of tasting the differences and sharing that with friends is
I
so
think
much fun.
The best honey is the honey that comes from your hive.
Totally. Okay, we can keep going if you wanted. Do you want to pull apart another hive?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. This hive up here was queenless, and they've recently made a new queen. So this could be another tricky one. I'm not sure.
A little queen in here. So new queens tend to be a little smaller at first, and then they get bigger after they mate and mature a little bit.
What's the pros and cons of using a queen excluder?
Well, for flow hives, you usually want to use one because the con is that the queen will go up into your flow super and lay drones in there, which is very disappointing. But yeah, I mean, the pros are that with a queen excluder, you know that the queen can't be in those boxes. You don't have to worry about her while you're harvesting honey. The cons are that they have to move through that queen excluder, and some people worry that it damages their wings. Some people say they won't move through the queen excluder, that they'll resist going up through it and going above it, and that you would actually get less honey because they resist using the queen excluder. That hasn't really been my experience, but when I'm using a queen excluder, I actually like to give them an upper entrance so that any of the foragers, if they want, can choose to bypass that queen excluder and go directly into the honey super at the top. But I also use queen excluders to keep my brood nest small because I want to have my bees stay calm, and the bigger their brood nest gets, the more defensive they can be. And the other thing that happens is if you have varroa mites, more brood means potentially more mites. So having a smaller brood nest, there's been some research that shows that keeping the brood nest small is actually beneficial for managing varroa. So I always go back and forth, but I'm on a queen excluder kick again. I'm using them now.
Rhonda wants to know, why would a swarm not stay in a hive?
Well, swarms are not invested in any one space. Maybe we should just take off this. Are we gonna? I forgot this one had a super on it. Let me just answer this question. So when you have a swarm, there's nothing holding them there. And so if you're looking for tips on how to encourage a swarm to stay, one thing you can do is try to make their experience more enjoyable. So I like to always make a swarm feel like they've chosen the box. So instead of kind of wrangling and forcing them to go in your box, just finding a gentle way to let them march into the box instead. So let's say it's on a branch, trimming the branch and just lowering it into the hive and letting them kind of choose the box. Or some people like to put the swarm in front of the hive and let them march in on their own. Another mistake I think people make with catching swarms is they'll move the swarm that afternoon right there in daytime, and that means you have to enclose the swarm in the box to move it. So I like to actually wait until dark to move the swarm, and that way they just wake up in a new place and they've had all night to settle in without being kind of disturbed. And if you can, give them a frame or two of empty comb. That's like giving them a furnished apartment. That's something they really like to have, and it keeps them from leaving. And the absolute best, so sometimes when I catch a really big swarm and I really don't want to lose it, I'll actually take a frame of open brood from another hive and give it to the swarm. And they usually won't abandon open brood. So I learned a cool trick from Cedar while I was here, which is that you can use this back door as a handle right here, which I did not know. Do you think we should take off the roof or just lift the whole thing off? So yeah, before I was like, oh, this is really awkward for lifting, and now I know. There's a secret handle.
Raymond, when he opens his hive, he's allowed raw. He can't find the queen but sees lots of capped brood and larvae. Do you know what the roar is?
It could just be a roar that's happening in reaction to you opening them. So sometimes when you first open them, they're like, ah. Just using a little bit of smoke and waiting a few seconds to let them calm down. Sometimes they roar too when you use the smoke. So that's the fun of beekeeping, is kind of really taking the time to like listen to these sounds and listen to your bees and watch them and see how they react to the different things you do and see if you can kind of work out what it means. I'm always striving to better understand them.
And what do you do with your hives over winter? Do you need to have specific practices?
I don't have a winter really, so there's not really that much that I do.
So for those that are just tuning in, we're here with Hilary Kearney all the way from San Diego, and she's giving us some tips on queen spotting. So if you've got questions, put them in the comments below and we'll answer them as we go. This hive has been queenless recently and they've got it together to raise their own new queen, so we'll be looking to see if we can find her. And meanwhile, as Hilary goes, she'll be
They're really full.
telling us a little bit about
I think they're
tips and
contemplating
tricks.
stinging my ankles right now too. So I check. I don't know if you noticed, but I checked the bottom of the queen excluder because there's always a chance that the queen could be on there. And if I were guessing where the queen was in here, we can see that it's full of bees all the way across. So there's not a clear cluster like there was in that last colony. But when I'm looking at the comb, some of the comb looks thinner. And one thing that bees do is they make honeycomb a little bit fatter. So if I were guessing, I would guess she's on this side somewhere, but it's a little hard to tell. I'm going to switch to the other side because I've got that feeling that she's on this side. So I want to pull out my first frame from the other side. And there's also a little bit more room here. So when it's really crowded like this, sometimes I'll just do a little extra smoke in the area where I want to pull out a frame so that I can see a little bit better, and also so that if the queen is there, she'll hopefully get out of the way.
Kyle's asking, so what's been your journey and how did you become so well known in the beekeeping community?
So I started out as an art student, and I just came across a beekeeping book really by chance. And I just became really fascinated with bees and just kind of fell into it. I never intended to do it as a business. It was just going to be a hobby. But then people immediately started asking me for things. Can you teach a class? Can you catch a swarm? Can you visit my kid's school? And I just started saying yes to that stuff. And then it got to the point where it became apparent that I needed to start a business. And I'm not really sure how I became so well known. I think I was one of the first people to do this kind of alternate. This is really tight. I'm trying to get it up without making a stink here. Yeah, I think I became one of the first people to do that kind of new model of making a living as a beekeeper, not by doing pollination or honey sales, but by doing education. And I was probably one of the first people to use Instagram as a way to teach people about bees. So here we can see it's so tight, it actually did roll a little bit here. And so if the queen had been on this frame, that would not have been good. Ooh, and now they're really mad. I'm sorry. So these honey frames over here are really bubbled out. And some bees got squashed when we tried to pull up this frame. So it's just gotten, this piece right here is really wavy. So what I would do actually is I would want to harvest this frame out because it's just going to cause a lot of issues in the future. But we'll leave it for right now.
Sam's asking, if you put a flow hive next to a current wild hive, will the bees move in by themselves?
So usually no. When you have an established hive, they look like this inside. They've got comb, they've got babies, they're invested in that space. They will send out swarms. Oh wow, that's all honey. Oh, so this is probably going to be mostly honey because we were queenless for a little while. But this side is empty. But they might send out a swarm, and it's possible they would occupy your flow hive, but it wouldn't mean that they had completely abandoned, what they were in. It would just be a section of them, really.
That makes sense.
Leaving and establishing a new colony. And if your flow hive is brand new, it doesn't really smell like bees yet. And so it's not necessarily going to be that attractive to a swarm. If you put a little, there's bait you can buy, or you can try lemongrass oil. Here she is. You see her? She was on the bottom. Did she go under? Oh no, she's right there. Yeah, there she is. She's pretty. So if you can see, look how fuzzy her back is. See that? That's how you know that she's a new queen, because she's still fuzzy. And over time, every time she lays an egg, she dips her head down in the cell beforehand, and that's how she loses her fuzz, because she's wearing it away. So when she's first, emerges as a new queen, she's very fuzzy, and then over time she'll get that nice shiny bald back.
So any other tips for new beekeepers in terms of what she looks like and how to more easily identify her in this whole hive of the picture? You're a new beekeeper, you've got 20,000 bees in a box, you've been asked to find the queen. How are you going to do it?
Well, you can see how she moves differently, so that's what Cedar was talking about. And I think that is a really good way of looking for her. It's almost like those magic eye tricks where you, she's like going around the side here, where you kind of blur your eyes and you hold it further away from yourself, and you see this kind of difference in pattern. But see how she's moving so much faster than the other bees? She's kind of scrambling over everyone. So looking for that change in pattern, and a good way to do that is kind of like, it's almost like you cross your eyes a little bit and you hold the frame a little bit further away. Another thing is to just look for that difference in body. So her body's much longer, and her wings do not go to the end of her body. So a lot of new beekeepers get confused with drones. So they see a drone, they see a bigger bee, a different looking bee, and they say, oh, that's the queen. So if you see a bee that you think might be the queen, check the wings. So see how her wings only go halfway down? That means she's a queen. If it's another kind of bee, the wings will go pretty much all the way to the end. So if you see a bee and you're kind of hemming and hawing, going, do the wings go all the way to the end? I'm not sure. It's probably not the queen, because this is a pretty obvious difference, right? The wings are only going like halfway down the body. And then she does have that nice shiny black back. She's got a little bit of a cleft in it. Her legs are longer and they're more splayed out. And do you see how they're orange? The queen usually has light colored legs, while the worker bees usually have dark legs. Another difference on the legs is her back legs do not have a pollen basket for collecting pollen, because she doesn't do that work. So worker bees will have that kind of flat area on their back leg for collecting pollen, and the queen doesn't have that. And then, in terms of, what we were talking about earlier, looking for her in the brood nest and looking for her more carefully on frames that have cells that need eggs. And when she settles, when she gets still like she is right now, there's a circle of bees forming around her too. See, all of her little attendants are facing her, so there's this kind of little flower shape where each attendant is kind of like a petal, and then the queen is in the middle. And a lot of people try to rely on color. They'll be like, oh, the queen's a different color. And you can see right here, this queen is a lighter color and she doesn't have any stripes. So a lot of people will say, oh, the queen doesn't have stripes. But that's not actually true of all queens. This queen doesn't have stripes, but she could. So some queens are stripy, some queens are very dark, some queens are very light. It just depends. And if you see your queen often, you know what she looks like, then you know what to look for. But if you're working with a hive you're not familiar with, it's better not to try to look for color at all. What always gets me is when there's those very blonde drones. Like the Italian bees often have those really, really blonde drones. They always catch your eye and just really throw you off. I call them Ken dolls. And this queen's still pretty small. She might get bigger as she matures, or she might stay this small, because some queens are on the small size and other queens will be really fat and big and easier to find.
So Peter wants to know, do you cycle out the frames, or when do you know when to replace brood frames or brood comb?
So I don't do this super deliberately, but if you're starting to see a comb that looks really dark and the bees aren't using it so much for brood anymore, that might be a good one to move up. So the way that I cycle out comb is I'll take a frame that I no longer want in the hive and I'll move it up to an area where there's going to be honey. Or in this case, you could move it to the side of the box. And in that case, there would be a better chance that they would turn it into honey. So I don't know if you noticed, but the end frames were actually, whoa, what is this? Cockroach? The end frames are actually usually honey. So you can move a frame that you want to cycle out. Wow. You can move a frame that you want to cycle out to the end, and that's going to be a good chance that they're going to turn it into honey. These bees are getting a little bit ticked off. We're going to close them up. Sometimes I'll just smoke the air around the hive rather than the actual bees.
So did you hear their noise change?
Mm-hmm. And the other thing, see what they're doing? They're kind of bouncing off of me, and when I put my hand near the hive, they kind of bounce off my hand. See that? They're coming very quickly at my hand, and they're kind of landing on it and going like, go away. So their whole flight pattern has changed. Their sound has changed, and they're just letting us know, like, we're ready to be closed up. We're done with you. So we're going to listen to them and close them up. And I'm just reordering this a little bit to help us not have the issue that we had in the beginning again. So there was an empty frame in there that I didn't realize was in there. And so I took the one that was a little bit bubbly and I put that next to the empty frame so that there'll be a little more space next time, hopefully, to pull it up without scraping. So I usually try to keep my colony in the same order. I try to keep the frames in the same order. But sometimes if I'm dealing with a little bit of funky comb, I'll reorder it, or like as someone was asking, if there's a frame I'm trying to cycle out, then I'll reorder it. And here's a piece of bridge comb like we talked about before. I actually am going to remove it right now because I don't want it to scrape when I try to put in this frame. And it is scraping right here because it's very bubbled. So I can feel that it's scraping. I'm actually just going to carve off a little bit more on this side. Let's see if we can kind of get away with this here. And if nothing else, you just go kind of slow. And sometimes I'll just leave the frame like this for a second and let them kind of run out of the way so I don't have to worry about them so much. And I can see over here there's more bridge comb on this frame actually that I'm actually going to scrape off.
Simon's asking, is one of the keys to good bee management the amount of smoke used in conjunction with the different notes the bees are making? I think good bee management is about just paying attention to your bees and responding to what they're telling you as best you can. And maybe that's using smoke, maybe that's doing something else. Some people don't like to use smoke. They'll use like a spray bottle of sugar water or
vinegar water, or maybe it just means moving one frame over or something like that. So it doesn't have to be smoke, but the idea of adjusting your behaviors by observations you're seeing with your bees is a good idea, I think. And another thing I like to do when I'm closing up a hive too is I actually do like to remove a little, if I see any really tall pieces of comb like this one, I'll just break this off, because otherwise it's gonna kind of get in the way of closing it up. And then that's how I end up with these little pockets, little balls of wax on all of my pockets like this. And then they go in the wash. And I also like to do a lot of smoke when I'm closing it up, so I can get any bees that are on top out of the way, so I don't have to worry about smashing them when I put the box back on.
Billy wants to know, how do you manage 60 to 90 hives?
I drive around a lot, and it's my full-time job, so just drive around and check them. And I actually rely a lot on intuition, so sometimes I'll be driving to one place to check a colony that I haven't seen in a while, and then I'll get a feeling to go to a different colony, and I've actually turned around in the car and driven to a totally different location. So I kind of get these like feelings about my hives when I need to check them if there's something going on. And what's incredible is that a lot of the time it's accurate. Like I'll get there and there'll be something wrong, like the colony will be queenless, or they'll be too crowded, or they'll be getting ready to swarm or something like that. So I kind of just go on instinct a lot of the time. And I also try to schedule my day out so that I'm hitting up all the hives in one area at once. So I kind of make out a schedule for the week, and if I'm going to one area for some reason, I'll try to hit up all the hives that are in that area. Okay.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions as we put this hive back together. So we've got Hilary Kearney here with us, who's been showing us about queen spotting, and she's got a new book out, and there'll be links in the comments below so you can go and check that out. It's a fascinating book and great fun for when you're for even my son, who's only 4.5 years old, and also for seasoned beekeepers to spot the queens in a book inside, and it helps hone your skills for when you're doing it in the real, because sometimes there is the case that you do need to find the queen. If you need to replace the queen, then you'll need to find her. And down here we've got some nice full jars of honey, which is a beautiful thing. We've got a nice flavour here in this jar. What we're going to do now is just show you how to finish that up and close it off. Now, I've just noticed these jars have been here open for an hour, and we often get these comments of how come the bees aren't going in to the honey, and sometimes you do get a bee, and we've got one just here. So all I'm going to do is fish her out here like this and put her around at the entrance for the other bees to quickly clean up. So to close it, it's a good thing to remember, and we put a little tag here, so if you forget and you're trying to put this cap in, then that reminds you, because it won't go in unless you close it. So it's as simple as putting this key in like that. You can do the honours if you like, and turning it. That's it. And what she's doing now is just resetting those parts of the comb into their original position so the bees can wax them all up again and go through that process of filling them with nectar. Look at that beautiful honey. It's such an amazing thing. If we look after our bees, then we do get this beautiful reward of honey. But it only happens if you're looking after your colony and you've got some nice flowers around. We've got one more question to finish off.
Hilary, Joel would like to know, what is the one thing, oh actually to both of you, the one thing that each of you wish you'd known when you first started beekeeping?
So much. I don't know. I guess I wish I had known like how addictive it was. I don't know, a lot of beekeepers say that. If I had known how addictive it was, I wouldn't have started. But maybe how much equipment was actually involved. So like I don't have a lot of space, and all of the space that I do have is taken up with beekeeping equipment. I have these huge piles of boxes. My whole car is full of equipment. It's like the car smells like a beehive, and it's completely full of tools and bee equipment and junk and random things that will like MacGyver to use for beekeeping stuff. And so, yeah, I wish I had known that it was going to take over my space in a really dramatic way. Yeah.
For me, I wished I had known how to harvest honey in an easier way. I remember when I was a kid, we used to harvest the honey, and admittedly we had a veil that my grandmother had made me, and it wasn't that great. It had a few holes with tape on it, and we would put that on, and then we'd go and harvest the honey with washing up gloves and small tape, and the hive was so aggressive, we'd get covered in stings, totally covered in stings. And then later on in life, I was running a small commercial apiary, and it was just an incredible amount of work, the honey harvesting, and as you say, a lot of room in the shed was taken up with mess, and I'm actually very poor at cleaning up mess. Most of the staff here at the Flow Hive office will agree, and what ends up happening is you've just got this mess that lingers and spreads from the kitchen to the workshop, and then all the critters start getting into it, and you wish you had have cleaned it up earlier. So that was the thing I really wished, and that's what sparked the journey of a decade-long task of developing the Flow Hive, and now it's sort of all more contained into a small box like this, and that in this climate here, there's no need even to take that box off, so all of the mess kind of stays in the hive, and the bees look after it there. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to check out Hilary's book, Queen Spotting, and thank you so much for coming all the way and giving us some tips and tricks on how to spot queens and what to look out for when you're new to beekeeping. Fun book, go check it out.